let us look at the natural carbon cycle. The natural carbon cycle is affected by the climate change. So we have a major thing like atmosphere and oil, gas and coal are there. So these are basically called as the sources, and the rest of the places are basically sinks where the carbon can be stored. So one is the soil, another one is the permafrost, because lots of carbon is actually present in these places like permafrost, soil, carbonates in the rock, ocean surface water, deep ocean and ocean sediments, vegetations. All of these places have lots of carbon. Atmosphere and oil, gas and coal are the places where carbon dioxide is actually released. So there are various fluxes are there. Flux means there is a movement of carbon from one place to another place. One is acting as a source, another one is acting as a sink. So the movement of carbon happens. The carbon may be in different forms, like maybe it is in the form of carbonate, or it may be in the form of carbon dioxide, or it may be in the form of methane. So depending on that, various carbon is moving from one source to sink. So here is the complete description of the scheme what we have seen in the previous one. So the first one is deep ocean water. Here carbon is present in 80%. Here we call this as a sink. That means actually this is the place where lots of carbon is being stored. So how the climate change affects this, because we are seeing there is a flux which happens because of temperature change or the climate change. So that is what we are going to see here. The increased temperature may affect the carbon solubility in the deep ocean water. So in the later part we are going to study about ocean acidification. So there we will be studying about the dissolved carbon dioxide in water, how it produces carbonic acid, bicarbonates and carbonates, and how it is affecting the entire carbon cycle. That we will be studying elaborately. So what is the flux description here in the ocean water is there is a large carbon storage, slow flux to the atmosphere. That means lots of carbon is being taken by the ocean, but only very small amount is released back to the atmosphere. So that is the flux. So that means something is coming in and something is also going out. And when we talk about the ocean sediment, it has only 4%, and this is stable. The stability may be affected by the sea level rise. So that means if there are more water, then the organic storage in the form of sediments may be affected. So here the accumulation is very slow. That is like millions of years it actually takes place for the accumulation. And in the ocean surface water, when we talk about, there are only 2% of the carbon is present here. So increased temperature and acidification can reduce the carbon uptake, because when it is more acidic, that means there is no more ability of the water to absorb carbon dioxide. So that means the absorption of carbon dioxide may reduce when the temperature increases. And the carbon flux to the atmosphere varies with the temperature. So that means if it is higher the temperature, more amount of carbon dioxide may be released. A simple example is we have the Pepsi or Coke, like carbonated drinks are there. So they are generally kept at a low temperature, because at low temperature the dissolution of carbon dioxide in water is more. But when it comes to the room temperature, we can see lots of brisk efflorescence or CO2 being released. So that means if the ocean temperature increases, that actually leads to release of more carbon dioxide to the atmosphere. And when we talk about the soil is behaving like a sink with 5% of carbon. So the change in land use and climate can affect the soil carbon storage. That means if there is a deforestation, that may lead to loss of more exposure of soil, and that leads to loss of carbon stored in the soil. So the flux depends on the land management and vegetation cover. So lower the vegetation cover, higher will be the release of carbon from the soils. Then permafrost is mainly in the Arctic or the polar region. So there 4% of the carbon is actually present there. So thawing, that means climate change means increase in temperature. So that means that leads to thawing of the permafrost. So this increases the carbon emission as the organic matter decomposition increases. And also there is a rapid flux to the atmosphere upon thawing, because these are stored only as a gaseous material, carbon dioxide. So when the thawing happens, these stored gases simply are released to the atmosphere. And vegetation is another one. It is only contributing to 1%. So here the growth pattern is altered by the climate effect and the carbon uptake. And here when we talk about the flux in the vegetation, carbon is being taken during the photosynthesis. That's the reason when there is high temperature, when the temperature is high, the photosynthesis is also little bit higher. That leads to absorption of more carbon dioxide. But in the winter, the temperatures are low, so that means the photosynthesis are also low, so that means the absorption of CO2 by the plant also reduces. So this varies based on the season. And of course, here we had given atmosphere and oil, gas and coal as the source of carbon dioxide. Basically, the carbon is produced from these two places. And higher temperature increases the carbon flux to the atmosphere. So wherever there is temperature increases, the gaseous carbon dioxide is taken up by the atmosphere. And when we talk about oil, gas and coal, extraction and combustion releases significant amount of carbon to the atmosphere. And the flux description is basically there is a direct, in the case of atmosphere, direct emission from human activity and natural sources are happening. And also oil, gas and coal, when we talk about, there is a major flux. Flux means a lot of release is actually happening during the combustion process. And when we look at the bigger global carbon reservoirs, so the global carbon cycle includes mechanical, chemical and biological process that transfer carbon among these reservoirs. So maybe ocean is the biggest one. We have seen 80% of the carbon is stored or present in the ocean. And there are other places. Some of the carbon can be sent to the ocean sediments or maybe to the ocean surface waters, and it may be released to atmosphere. And also oil, gas and coal produce carbon dioxides. Soil also has carbon. Permafrost releases during thawing, and vegetation consumes carbon. So these are all the various sources or reservoirs which are involved in the carbon cycle. All of them are involved. And there are two major types of carbon cycles. One is called the fast carbon cycle, another one is called the slow carbon cycle. In the fast carbon cycle, there is a rapid exchange among the ocean, terrestrial, biosphere and atmosphere. Carbon is shifted within these three spheres very quickly. And when we talk about the slow carbon cycle, this involves exchange with geological reservoirs such as deep soil and deeper ocean and rocks. So this is a very slow cycle. So that's the reason we say this happens over sometimes millions of years. And the fast carbon cycle happens within a couple of days or a week. So what are the components of the carbon cycle? Basically, we have atmosphere, ocean, land and geological carbon. These are all the four major components of the carbon cycle. And we have already seen which are the sources and the sinks. And how does it impact? We have seen for the global, but when we look at specifically the Arctic, the permafrost thaw is the important thing because this affects the carbon cycle. Of course, this is interrelated with the climate change also. So if you just look at the permafrost thaw alone, it releases lots of carbon to the atmosphere. So that is what we can understand. So, and the second one is sea ice decline. So what happens when the sea ice declines? When the sea ice declines, it alters the oceanic carbon absorption rate. Sea ice declining means now more water is exposed to carbon dioxide. So the carbon dioxide can directly get into water. That is how the sea ice change affects the more amount of carbon dioxide is being taken by the seawater. Then vegetation changes means it influences the terrestrial carbon sequestration. That means when the taiga and tundra forest plants are being removed, boreal forest plants are removed, that exposes the soil. And this change also affects the carbon cycle because many of the plants may absorb carbon dioxide. They will remove the carbon dioxide, but when the plants are removed, then there is no more plants, so the carbon dioxide is could not be removed. So that means they exist in the atmosphere. So that means it affects the entire carbon cycle. So here is a pictorial diagram of the carbon cycle. So we have the Arctic Ocean and there are carbon pumps are there. Carbon dioxide is released from the vessel here, and river also brings in lots of carbon to the ocean, and the surface ocean also releases some amount of carbon dioxide. Solar radiation leads to photosynthesis. So these are all the various things that is happening. And when there is a marine biota, some of the primary producers also like phytoplanktons and other things which are present in the ocean, they can consume the carbon dioxide, they can produce food, and they become the food for the higher species living in the food web in the Arctic. So that is how the carbon cycle is also involved in the biological processes also in the food web. And here is the small phytoplankton is being consumed by the zooplankton, and the zooplankton leads to is being eaten by fish and other things. So the bacteria is also present, which also converts some of the carbon that is present in the ocean. And many of them, when they die, they form the sediment. So that is how the entire carbon cycle is involved in the Arctic Ocean. Here, let us look at the organic carbon recycling. So, what is the definition? What do you call like organic carbon recycling? It is a process of breaking down organic matter and recycling carbon back into the ecosystem. So, carbon can be present in different places. So, we break them down and put it into another system. So, that is what is called basically organic carbon recycling. That means moving from one place to another place. What are the key components? One is by the decomposition mechanism, another by microbial activity, and by carbon sequestration. So these are all the three major activities by which the organic carbon is recycled. So how do they influence the Arctic? The one is in the form of permafrost thaw. They release the stored organic carbon, and then the microbial activity leads to increase because the microbial activity increases with increase in the temperature, and this accelerates the decomposition. So that's the reason when the temperatures are very low in the winter or in the Arctic, the decompositions are also much lesser in Arctic region. That means the microbial activity is very less. But when the temperature increases, the microbial activity increases, and that leads to more decomposition. And what is the impact of greenhouse gases in the Arctic? So the release of carbon dioxide or methane from the decomposing organic matter increases the amount of carbon dioxide that is present. So that means more and more greenhouse gases are released from these areas. So how do we know all these things are happening? We can look at the statistical data. So the carbon stocks in the permafrost is approximately around 1,500 gigatons of carbons are present in the permafrost. And what is the rate of thawing? That is increasing due to the rising Arctic temperature. So we had seen about Arctic amplification. So the Arctic amplification is happening due to climate change. So that means the temperature increase leads to more and more thaw of the permafrost. So what are the ways by which we can study or understand this? One is by soil sampling. So we can collect and analyze the soil samples to see what is the change in the carbon. The other one is the remote sensing, where satellites are used for monitoring vegetation and the land cover change. The third one is laboratory experiment, where we can do incubation study to measure the microbial respiration. And let us come to the major component, which is the permafrost. So this is currently the net sink of CO2, but due to the climate change, it is now slowly becoming like a source of carbon. That means it is releasing more carbon dioxide and methane to the atmosphere than how much it had actually stored. So this is one of the major problems we are currently facing. So the thawing and decomposition by microbes releases lots of carbon dioxide and methane. So the methane and carbon dioxide is released by the thawing and decomposition by microbes, because the microbes are present in the soil. Permafrost is nothing but the frozen soil. So the microbes, when the temperature increases, starts releasing they start decomposing the things which are present, which releases carbon dioxide and methane. So this can be taken up by the plants for the photosynthesis. But warmer spring and summer temperature leads to increase of temperature, which leads to decomposition of more and more thawing, which leads to more and more release of carbon dioxide. So that means it is a positive cycle, positive feedback. So warmer temperature leads to increase in the thawing, so which leads to increase in the photosynthesis. So that way the amount of carbon that is released kept on increasing. And also there is another thing, what we are seeing is in the land, and if you look at the hydrological regime, so the melting of permafrost leads to production of methane in water bodies. So this happens when there is no oxygen, but this also depends on the landscape, heat diffusion and time. So these are all the how the melting of permafrost is affected is, one is by the loss of oxygen, another one, this depends on the landscape heat diffusion and time. The next one is the important thing we talked about, methane. So methane hydrates are the very important thing which are present in the carbon cycle. So the marine or terrestrial biogenic carbon decomposed in the absence of oxygen. So this is what is the origin for the methane hydrates, and these are actually found at the deep permafrost soils, ocean shells, shell slopes, and deeper ocean bottom sediments are the places where we can find methane hydrates, and these are stable under low temperature and high pressure, because at the bottom of the ocean we have extremely high pressures. Similarly, in the Arctic region the temperatures are low, so that's the reason these methane hydrates are present at the bottom of the sea. And these are stabilized by warming permafrost soils, ocean waters, and sediments under changes in the pressure. So that means the increase in the temperature due to global warming reduces the ocean temperature, increases the ocean temperature. So that's the reason these methane hydrates are destabilized because of the increase in the temperature.